Welcome to Titan HST's Business Continuity Today, hosted by Todd DeVoe, where planning meets reality.
Good morning, and good afternoon, depending on where you are at. And I'm Todd DeVoe. I'm the Director of Emergency Services at Titan HST, and I've been responding to emergencies and disasters well for a long time now. In addition to the work I do at Titan HST, I'm an educator, teach at the post-secondary level, and learning and sharing what I've learned is a passion for me. And welcome to Business Continuity Today, where we'll continue to learn together. Today, we're talking about climate change and how it impacts business continuity decisions. And I want to share a couple of stories that, well, getting into what climate change looks like and realistically the impact that it had. And one of the things I find really interesting is that, well, I think at times that we overlook what this really means. What I mean by that is when we're in the moment, responding to and dealing with climate issues, do we think of it as being something that's a climate change problem? And let's go back a few years to 1995, the Chicago heat wave. And I really find it interesting that the city woke up to temperatures of 106 degrees. Now, for those of us on the West Coast, we probably see 106 degrees a few times a year in the summer. If you live in the desert time, like Phoenix or whatever, that's probably a nice cool day for you. However, you got to understand in Chicago, it wasn't just 106 degrees. It was 106 degrees plus that Midwest humidity that was involved in this. So the heat index, which measures how the temperature actually feels to the body, would hit 126 degrees by the time that day was over. They weren't sure what was going on. Well, I mean, they knew it was a weather issue, but they weren't sure where this like why this sort of came out of nowhere. Meteorologists kind of have an idea, and I said they've been warning the residents about this 2-day heat wave, but the temperatures wouldn't end that soon. And what I mean by they weren't sure is like this is something that was not a normal temperature for things that are happening in Chicago. So when the heat wave broke later that week, some of the city streets buckled. There's electrical or historical use of electricity specifically for air conditioning, right? The power grids failed, leaving residents without power for up to 2 days. And by July 20th, over 700 people died, right? That's more than twice the number that died in Chicago fire in 1871. 20 times the number of those struck by Hurricane Andrew in 92. Right, and in the Great Chicago Heat Wave, it was one of the deadliest heat waves in American history. And the weird part about it is we don't really talk about this event, and I think a lot of it had to do with politics, realistically, putting those numbers down. The age of the people who passed during this was mostly elderly, and it was interesting to see that it's one of these events that we really don't get into very often. Another one was the 2016 Louisiana flood, another flood thing that we don't talk about very often. One of the reasons why it was in the middle of an election cycle, so the media wasn't covering it. And it was one of the worst floods that occurred in United States history. Another one of those things that we don't talk about, which was caused by a severe weather event. And then we go from heat to the cold. Everybody remembers the Texas snowstorm that happened in February of last year. It began with a cold front moving through the area and beginning the first surge of cold air to the region. And, I was in Texas, a few weeks ago, and, we always think of Texas heat, but it got pretty cold out there, for us. And this was in December. It dropped into the mid 20s. So cold weather should be a shocker to those that live in Texas. However, this was one of those ones that's a very prolonged cold. So it began in the early mornings on February 11th, and that's when the storm started hitting. This advisory would end up getting expanded to include most of the state. And, well, this is the first taste of winter snow that they've had in the region, and a stronger Arctic cold front was coming down below it, right? And so on February 12th, the winter storm watch was issued, and well, it ended up we saw it on the news, right? For those of us that weren't living through it, those that lived through it had to go through that process, right? And why is this? These things make the news because they're extraordinary. There's stuff that is not what we would expect. If that was a snowstorm hitting New York or Boston, it might be a really bad snowstorm, but it's what we expect. These are things that are different. And this is why when we start talking about climate change, staying away from the politics, I say this often again, and often and often I'll say it again, that we're not talking about the cause of climate change. That's not what we do in this profession. But we do have to deal with is what occurs, what the outcomes are, right? So in other words, even if it's cyclical, it's not. If you don't believe it's caused by humans, that's fine. All right, we're still dealing with the issues of what it is when severe weather occurs. Now, why is this important? Because a survey was put out, and 54%, I'm sorry, businesses reporting that 54% of their downtime had to do with inclement weather, with bad weather, right? And this is a new. This is a kind of well, this has started been tracking it since the late 2000s, or I mean mid 2000s, right? Mid 2000s, early 2000s, whatever. We're in the 20s, right? So since the teens, I suppose. And so it start tracking those times, right, of when business is down. So what does this mean? This means that we had to really start thinking about climate change and how does it impact what we're doing with business. Now, what areas of business does it impact? Well, if the electrical grid is down, like what's happened it happened in Texas as well, but what happened in Chicago during heat, right? You're not going to be able to open up your doors for business. You're not going to be if you have some sort of service industry. Can you have people coming into the building? If you at the ice cream shop, how do you keep your ice cream frozen? Right? Those are some of those issues that occur when the grid goes down, especially in that high heat uh, issues that when it happened in Chicago in '95. Now, mind you, that's not the only heat wave we've had, obviously, right? We've had others since then, but that just happens to be one that had so many deaths. That's why we're talking about it today, right? And that really got one of those ones that happened with all those deaths that we're just not paying attention to, and that very, very few people, unless you're in the business, really understand that happened, right? Texas has the other side of things, right? It was freezing weather. People couldn't drive, and their homes were down, and then they started doing interesting ways to keep themselves warm, which was causing other issues such as fires and carbon monoxide poisoning that was happening throughout the area. Ford Motor Company stepped up with their trucks and donated them so they could keep homes with electricity. I thought that was kind of an interesting side note that occurred with the winter storms in Texas. What are you going? Excuse me. What are you going to do? What is your plan for extreme weather? Right? We had a tornado storm that just ripped through 6 states in December. And again, it was a weird warm weather pattern that came in that caused the unstable cells to occur, which caused the tornadoes. Extraordinary, outside of the norm of what's going on. What is your plan to deal with supply chain issues that occur when flooding occurs, when ships can't get into the ports, when trains can't move, or trucks can't drive down the freeways, right? We've seen supply chain issues going out throughout the United States right now on fairly blue sky days. Add a gray sky or a black sky to it, and it's going to impact that shipping and supply chain even more, right? How are you reaching out to your employees, right, when it comes to whether or not they're able to come into work or not, or should come into work or not? What systems are you using to be able to communicate with them? Do you have a communication plan set in place that will trigger when we have an event such as a hurricane, tornado, ice storm that's outside of the ordinary, things that you wouldn't expect to be coming, during non-traditional times when these would occur, such as Texas with the winter storms? These are things we have to think about as business continuity managers and emergency managers. Is how do we react to and plan for, and also execute these plans. In Texas, for instance, you know, when the cold front came through, the roads became impassable. They're just frozen. And so how are you, what happens when you have a 40, 50, 60% reduction in your workforce that's not able to make it into work due to the weather conditions? What are you planning for there? Right? Obviously, with the power going out, you're going to have internet connection issues. Again, what is your plan for that? These are some of the things you just have to think about, and this is why we're in this position and why we're in this business, right? So, but now, not just adding, you know, the typical disaster events or things like this into our business continuity plan, we have to really be leaning forward and thinking about what it is with extreme weather. Well, other things that I want to really kind of get into here in just a couple of seconds is that when you're making these plans, right, you want to share them also with the people that you're working with, your employees, the teams that you're working with, the vendors that you're working with, because obviously the vendors are going to be impacted by this event as well. So you should have these plans set with them, have those conversations with them early and often, right? Also, you should do regular practices and exercises with them. NOAA is reporting that these extreme weather events are increasing, right? Again, whether you want to say it's climate change or not, you know, we could get into that, but that's a whole other story. But it definitely remains challenging because it's creating some additional issues with them being able to accurately predict what the weather is looking like at this time. You know, we're seeing more thunderstorms, we're seeing more snowstorms, we're seeing more tornadoes, we're seeing more uh, uh, weather events in the Western United States, such as drier days, more fire weather, if you will. We went from a fire season to a 365-day fire season in the Western United States. You know, these are things that were unusual in the past. We're looking at these events as outbreaks now. You know, when this period of time when we're going to be really prepared for them, but they're also coming when least expected. So you have to really prepare for this climate change weather issues that are going on. You know, again, to take a look at NOAA and the work that they're doing. Please take a look at it. Take a look at what they're projecting. You know, they have the data that's looking over the last 20 years or so or more, and to show what the weather is going to be like and the predictive models. We are going to have more extreme events, and they are going to impact what you do on a daily basis. Again, now we have to go over and talk to our C-suite about this and work for preparedness throughout your organization, right? You need to prepare for severe weather, regardless of what the cause is, right? This is going to make physical and operational strategic challenges throughout your organization. We're going to have damage and we're going to have disruption. So you're going to have to manage those impacts. Please be ready. Please be prepared. Thank you so much for being here with us here today. And visit Titan HST for all your communication needs. And remember to follow us on your favorite podcast player. And go ahead and jump on to LinkedIn and follow us over there and tell us what you feel about what we're talking about here with climate change and business continuity. Until then, stay safe and stay hydrated.